Have you ever felt like your body is changing in ways you didn't expect? Aging is a natural part of life, but it can sometimes leave us feeling uncertain or even less connected to those we love. In today's video, we'll be exploring the emotional journey of intimacy as we grow older, the physical changes that come with it, and how to rediscover deep, meaningful connections. Stay with us until the end to learn how aging can be embraced with grace, and how intimacy can evolve into something even more profound over time. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I encourage you to click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. Your support means a lot, so if you find value in this video, please give it a thumbs up to help spread our message. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on today's topic. If you enjoy the content, please comment 1 below. If it doesn't resonate with you, leave a 0. Your feedback is crucial as it helps me create better videos that align with your interests. Now, let's get started. Hello, my name is Esther Griselda, and as I sit here reflecting on the decades that have shaped me, I am overwhelmed by the depth and richness of my life. Each wrinkle on my face, each silver strand of hair, tells a story of triumphs, heartaches, laughter, and most importantly, the wisdom that comes with growing older. As someone who has lived through countless phases of life, from the exuberance of youth to the quiet contemplation of old age, I feel compelled to share something that doesn't get spoken about nearly enough. It's a topic that often hides in the shadows of embarrassment and fear, yet it affects many men and couples as the years pass by. I want to talk about the natural process of penis shrinkage in old age. Now, I know this may be a subject that some find awkward or uncomfortable, but from the bottom of my heart, I believe we need to talk about it openly. Aging, in all its complexity, is not something to dread. It is a journey that can be embraced with grace and dignity, if only we learn to confront the changes that come with it. Aging does not diminish our worth. In fact, it deepens the beauty of our experiences. And just as our skin wrinkles, our hair grays, and our joints stiffen, so too does the male body undergo its own transformations. I remember so vividly the days of my youth when intimacy seemed inseparable from the vitality of our bodies. When I first met the man who would become my husband, I was captivated by his energy, his masculinity, and yes, by the physical passion we shared. He was strong, confident, and in those early days, sex was fiery and exhilarating. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, and every touch felt like it could set the world on fire. It was a time of exploration, where every embrace was charged with the electricity of youth. Our love felt invincible, and intimacy was tied to the physical connection we shared. But, as life moved forward, so did we. The once strong bodies we both had began to show signs of wear. My husband, always so full of vitality, began to notice changes in his body that neither of us were prepared for. The first sign was the decline in his erections. At first, it was easy to dismiss as just a passing thing, something that would correct itself with time. But the truth was, this was a new chapter, one we hadn't anticipated. His erections became less firm, less frequent, and sometimes, before we could even begin to enjoy the closeness, they would disappear altogether. It was as if his body was betraying him, and I could see the frustration in his eyes, the disappointment he carried silently. In those moments, my heart ached for him. As his wife, I wanted to be there for him in every way, not just physically, but emotionally. I knew this change was affecting his confidence, his sense of masculinity. I could see it in the way he carried himself, in the quiet moments when he thought I wasn't watching. But I also knew something else. Intimacy doesn't die with age. It simply evolves. We were not the same people we had been in our 20s, but that didn't mean we couldn't experience a deep connection in this new stage of life. Our love wasn't just about physical pleasure anymore. It had become about trust, understanding, and a bond that goes far beyond the surface. We began to redefine what intimacy meant for us. No longer was it solely about physical performance or the ability to sustain an erection. It became about closeness, about the quiet moments where we would lie together, simply holding each other, breathing in sync, feeling the warmth of our bodies pressed together. We found joy in the tender kisses, the soft caresses, and the shared memories that filled the spaces between words. These moments were intimate in ways that youth had never allowed us to appreciate. The love we shared in our older years was less about passion and more about tenderness, less about performance and more about presence. As my husband and I faced these changes together, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. Love, real love, doesn't depend on the physical. Yes, our bodies age, and yes, they change in ways that can be difficult to accept. But that does not mean we lose our ability to connect deeply with one another. On the contrary, the challenges of aging can bring couples closer if we allow them to. The physical changes that come with time are just another part of the human experience, one that, if embraced, can lead to a deeper and more profound form of intimacy. There were times, of course, when frustration crept in. There were moments when I could see the sadness in my husband's eyes, when the weight of his changing body seemed too much for him to carry. But we faced it together. We talked about it, we laughed about it, and most importantly, we accepted it. This acceptance, this ability to talk openly and honestly, is what kept our connection strong. We didn't let the physical changes define us or our relationship. Instead, we chose to focus on what really mattered: the love we had built over the years, the experiences we had shared, and the future we still had together. So, to anyone out there who is struggling with the changes that aging brings, I want to say this: you are not alone. These changes do not diminish your value or your ability to love and be loved. Aging is not the end of intimacy. It's the beginning of a new kind of closeness, one that is richer, deeper, and more meaningful than the fleeting passions of youth. Embrace it. Talk about it. And remember, love, in all its forms, only grows stronger with time. It was around that time that I noticed something else changing, something I hadn't prepared for. My husband, the man who had always been so vibrant, confident, and self-assured, began to experience a noticeable shrinkage in the size of his penis. At first, I didn't give it much thought, assuming it was just a part of the natural aging process that we'd both have to accept. But soon enough, I realized how deeply this was affecting him. The man who had always carried himself with pride and strength was now pulling away emotionally, retreating into a shell I had never seen before. He became quiet about intimacy, no longer initiating the playful touches or affectionate gestures that had once come so naturally. The bedroom, which had always been a space of connection and love, started to feel heavy with unspoken feelings. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. One evening, I decided to bring it up gently, sensing his discomfort but knowing that avoidance wasn't the answer. The look on his face when I mentioned it told me everything. His eyes, once filled with confidence and warmth, now reflected uncertainty and even shame. My heart ached for him. This was a man who had faced countless challenges in life with unwavering strength. But here he was, feeling as though he had lost a piece of himself. He was embarrassed, and that embarrassment was slowly eroding the connection between us. I could see it happening, and it terrified me. For a man who had always been proud of his masculinity, of his ability to please and connect with me on such a deep, physical level, the idea that his body was now betraying him was devastating. He began to avoid conversations about sex entirely. It wasn't just about the physical changes, it was about what those changes symbolized to him. He felt like he was losing a part of his identity, as though his value as a man was tied to his ability to perform in the way he used to. It was heartbreaking to watch because, in my eyes, none of that mattered. His worth was not defined by those physical abilities, but by the love, support, and companionship we had shared for decades. I couldn't stand by and watch him suffer in silence, so I decided to take action. I spent hours researching everything I could about the changes that happen to men's bodies as they age, hoping to find answers that would help both of us understand what was happening. What I found was eye-opening. The shrinkage of the penis with age is a completely natural process, something that happens to almost all men as they grow older. It occurs due to a variety of factors: loss of elasticity in the skin, reduced blood flow, and changes in hormone levels. None of this was unusual, and more importantly, None of it had to signal the end of pleasure or intimacy. When I shared what I had learned with him, I could see the relief in his eyes, but the emotional weight of it all still lingered. It wasn't just about understanding the science behind it, it was about coming to terms with a new reality. As we talked through it, we both realized that this was an opportunity for us to redefine what intimacy meant for us. Yes, the physical changes were undeniable, but they didn't have to be the end of our closeness. In fact, they could open the door to a deeper connection, one that was less reliant on physicality and more grounded in emotional and spiritual closeness. As we began to navigate this new chapter, we discovered something beautiful. Intimacy became less about performance and more about presence. We started to cherish the quiet moments, holding hands while lying in bed, exchanging tender kisses without any pressure or expectation. We found new ways to be close, ways that didn't require the same physicality as before but still brought immense joy and satisfaction. Our emotional bond, which had always been the cornerstone of our relationship, grew even stronger. We learned to communicate in ways that went beyond words, ways that only years of love and understanding could foster. I want to share this part of my life because I believe it's a conversation that needs to happen more often. As a society, we are so focused on youth, on physical beauty and performance, that we forget the incredible depth that comes with aging. We forget that intimacy isn't just about the body, it's about the connection between two souls. Growing older doesn't mean the end of love or passion. It means an opportunity to rediscover what truly matters. Through this journey, my husband and I have come to a place of acceptance. He no longer feels the need to prove anything, and I no longer worry about the things we can't control. Instead, we focus on the beauty of what we've built together. We've shared a life full of ups and downs, and these changes are just another part of that journey. We've learned that real love isn't about youthful vigor or flawless bodies. It's about being there for each other, through every phase, every change, and every challenge. For anyone going through something similar, I want you to know that you are not alone. The changes that come with aging are natural, and they don't have to take away the joy and pleasure of intimacy. In fact, they can deepen it in ways you never expected. Embrace the changes, talk about them openly with your partner, and remember that love is so much more than the physical. It's about connection, trust, and the shared history that binds you together. Aging, in all its complexities, can be beautiful if we allow ourselves to see it that way. One quiet evening, after we had finished dinner and were sitting together, I knew it was time for a conversation that had been lingering in the silence between us for far too long. I could sense the emotional distance that had started to creep into our relationship, an invisible wall that neither of us had directly acknowledged but both could feel. My heart was heavy because I knew what was causing it. My husband, the strong, proud man I had loved for so many years, was quietly struggling with a change in his body that had shaken his confidence to the core. So I reached out, took his hand, and said, "We need to talk." I didn't want to push him, but I needed him to know that I understood. "I know you've been feeling different," I said gently, "and I want you to know that it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's certainly nothing for you to be ashamed of." I could see the tension in his face slowly melting away as I spoke. The unspoken fear and embarrassment that had been weighing him down were finally being brought into the light, and it was a relief for both of us. I explained to him that as we age, our bodies go through changes that are natural, inevitable, and completely normal. "We're both growing older," I said, smiling softly, "and there's no shame in that. What's important isn't how our bodies look or function, but the love and connection we share." I wanted him to understand that I didn't love him any less because his body was different now. In fact, I loved him more for everything we had been through together, for the way we had grown closer over the years, for the life we had built side by side. The fact that he couldn't maintain an erection the way he used to didn't matter to me. What mattered was him, his heart, his kindness, the way he made me feel safe and loved. In that moment, something shifted between us. It was as though we had finally let go of the pressure to maintain an ideal that no longer served us. We realized that intimacy, true intimacy, had little to do with physical performance and everything to do with emotional connection. For the first time, we both felt free. Free from the unrealistic expectations that society places on men, free from the insecurities that had quietly been building up between us. We were free to explore a new kind of intimacy, one that wasn't tied to the idea of youth or physicality, but rooted in something much deeper. As we moved forward, we discovered a different kind of closeness, one that wasn't based on the need for an erection or the pursuit of climax. We began to savor the little moments of tenderness that we had once overlooked in our younger, more hurried years. Long, slow kisses became more meaningful than any rushed encounter, and holding hands as we lay in bed felt as intimate as any physical act we had once shared. We found joy in simply being together, in touching each other's skin, in feeling the warmth of each other's presence. There was no longer any pressure to perform, no sense of failure if things didn't go a certain way. One of the most beautiful realizations we had during this time was that pleasure didn't need to be tied to an erection. We began to explore new ways of connecting that didn't rely on traditional notions of sex. We spent more time in foreplay, taking our time to enjoy each other's bodies in ways that didn't necessarily lead to intercourse. We found new ways of giving and receiving pleasure, and in doing so, we deepened our emotional bond. What had once been a source of anxiety and frustration became an opportunity for us to grow closer in ways we hadn't anticipated. As the weeks passed, I noticed a change in my husband. Slowly, but surely, his confidence began to return. He wasn't the same man he had been in his youth, but that was okay. He no longer needed to measure his worth by his physical performance. He started to accept his body for what it was, with all its changes and imperfections. And with that acceptance came a sense of peace. Peace with himself, peace with the passage of time, and peace with a new chapter we were entering as a couple. Our sex life, far from diminishing, became more fulfilling than ever before. By letting go of the pressure to meet certain physical expectations, we were able to focus on what truly mattered: our connection, our love, and the pleasure of simply being together. We learned that sex, in its most meaningful form, is about so much more than the physical act itself. It's about the way you make your partner feel, the way you communicate through touch and presence, and the way you share in the joy of each other's company. One of the most important lessons we took from this journey was that intimacy is not confined to the bedroom. It's in the way we treat each other every day, in the small, seemingly insignificant moments that make up the fabric of our lives together. It's in the way we listen to each other, the way we offer comfort when one of us is feeling low, and the way we laugh together even when life gets tough. Intimacy is about being fully present with your partner, not just when everything is going well, but especially during the difficult moments when life throws unexpected challenges your way. As we grew older together, we came to realize that love and intimacy are about far more than physical attraction or sexual performance. They are about the deep emotional connection that grows stronger with time, the trust and understanding that only comes from years of shared experiences. They are about standing by each other through the changes that aging inevitably brings, and knowing that, no matter what, you are loved for who you are, not for what your body can or cannot do. For anyone who might be facing similar changes, I want to offer this message of hope. Growing older is not the end of intimacy. It's the beginning of a new kind of connection, one that is deeper, richer, and more meaningful than anything you experienced in your youth. Embrace the changes, accept your body as it is, and remember that love is about so much more than the physical. It's about how you make each other feel, how you show up for one another, and how you continue to grow together, even as your bodies change. In the end, what truly matters is the love and connection you share, the moments of tenderness, the quiet understanding, and the deep emotional bond that only strengthens with time. This is the essence of intimacy, and it is something that only gets better as the years go by. It's a well-known truth that men, from an early age, are taught to equate their value and masculinity with their physical strength, stamina, and sexual performance. Society puts immense pressure on men to maintain a certain image of virility and dominance throughout their lives, as though their worth as human beings is intrinsically tied to the size of their penis or their ability to perform in the bedroom. This expectation is not only unrealistic, but profoundly unfair. And yet, as the years pass and those inevitable physical changes begin to manifest, Many men find themselves grappling with feelings of inadequacy, embarrassment, or even shame. But here's the truth I want every man to know. Your worth has absolutely nothing to do with the size of your penis, the firmness of your erection, or any other physical trait that might change as you age. Your true value lies in how you love, how you care, and how deeply you connect with the people you hold dear. It lies in your capacity for empathy, your kindness, your strength of character, and the way you treat your partner with respect, affection, and tenderness. As someone who has lived a long and fulfilling life alongside the love of my life, I can say with absolute certainty that intimacy in older age has the potential to be even more rewarding, more satisfying, and more meaningful than it ever was in youth. There's a certain beauty in growing older together, something that goes far beyond the physicality of sex or the fleeting pleasures of youth. With maturity comes a depth of understanding, a patience, and a presence that you simply can't achieve when you're younger and still driven by the need to prove something. When my husband and I were young, like most people, we placed so much emphasis on the physical side of intimacy. Our love life was filled with passion, urgency, and the sense that every moment together needed to be exciting, new, and physically fulfilling. We were, like so many couples, caught up in the idea that the success of our intimate life hinged on performance, stamina, and the pursuit of pleasure. And while those early days were certainly filled with excitement, I now understand that there is so much more to intimacy than simply what happens between the sheets. As we aged, and as my husband's body began to change, we both had to confront the realities of growing older. The first time we noticed the decline in his erections, there was a quiet but undeniable tension between us. He was embarrassed, confused, and though he didn't say it out loud, I knew he was feeling like less of a man. He avoided the topic for a while, trying to brush it off or pretend like it wasn't affecting him, but the distance that started to grow between us told a different story. It wasn't just about the physical changes, it was about what those changes represented to him, and how he feared they might change the way I saw him. I'll never forget the evening when we finally talked about it. We had just finished dinner, and there was a stillness in the air that seemed to hang between us. I took his hand in mine, sat down beside him, and told him that I understood what he was going through. I explained that his body changing didn't make him any less of a man, and it certainly didn't make me love him any less. What mattered to me wasn't the strength of his erection, or his ability to perform the way he had when we were young. What mattered was the connection we shared, the love, the trust, and the bond that had only grown stronger over the years. It was in that moment that we both began to see our relationship in a new light. We realized that intimacy wasn't about performance, it wasn't about achieving a particular outcome, and it wasn't about living up to some societal standard of what sex should be. We learned that true intimacy comes from the emotional connection we had built over decades, from the way we communicated with each other, from the way we touched and held each other, and from the deep sense of comfort that comes from truly knowing and being known by another person. If you are still watching this video, and find these lessons useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. With this newfound understanding, our love life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. We stopped focusing on the physical aspects of intimacy and started exploring new ways of connecting that went beyond sex. We learned to savor the quiet moments, holding hands, lying together in bed, enjoying the feeling of each other's presence without the pressure to perform. We began to appreciate the beauty of simply being together, of touching each other's skin, of kissing without any expectation of where it might lead. In those moments, we found a deeper kind of pleasure, one that wasn't tied to the act of sex itself, but to the intimacy that came from being fully present with one another. One of the most significant shifts that occurred was in how we viewed our bodies. When we were younger, like so many people, we had been caught up in the pursuit of physical perfection. We wanted toned muscles, youthful skin, and bodies that met society's ideal of beauty. But as the years passed and the wrinkles began to appear, we realized that our bodies were so much more than objects to be judged by their appearance. They were the vessels that had carried us through life, through all of our shared experiences, and through the ups and downs of marriage. My wrinkles, my husband's scars, the changes in our bodies, all of these things became symbols of the life we had lived together. The body, as it ages, becomes a living map of the stories we've lived, the mistakes we've made, and the lessons we've learned. Instead of looking at our aging bodies with disappointment, we decided to look at them with gratitude. Every line, every change, was a testament to our resilience, our love, and our growth. My husband began to see his body in a new way, too. He realized that his masculinity wasn't tied to the size of his penis or the strength of his erections. Those things were just one small part of his being, one part that had changed, just like so many other parts of life do over time. But none of that had the power to diminish the man he was. As we continued to grow older together, we found that our sex life didn't fade away, it simply evolved. By letting go of the need to meet certain physical expectations, we were able to focus on what truly mattered, our connection, our love, and the joy we found in simply being together. We discovered that sex, in its truest form, is about so much more than the physical act. It's about the way you make your partner feel, the way you connect emotionally, and the way you cherish each other in every moment, whether that's in or out of the bedroom. Perhaps the most important lesson we learned was that intimacy is not confined to physicality. It's in the way we treat each other, the way we care for one another, and the way we show up, especially during life's challenges. It's in the way we listen, support, and love each other through every change that aging brings. At the end of the day, intimacy is about connection, the kind of connection that transcends the physical and touches the very core of who we are as people. Growing older together has been a gift. It has taught us that love, in its most enduring form, is not about youthful passion or physical perfection. It's about being there for each other, through all the changes, and finding new ways to love, appreciate, and connect as we continue to walk through life hand in hand. As the years passed and the inevitable physical changes started to make themselves known, I witnessed a quiet transformation in my husband that, looking back, fills me with immense pride. For so long, like many men, he had carried the weight of societal expectations on his shoulders. The unspoken demand to remain virile, strong, and sexually capable, as though his worth as a man was tied exclusively to these fleeting qualities. The idea that manhood was defined by the size of his penis, the strength of his erections, or his ability to maintain youthful energy in the bedroom had been ingrained in him from a young age. But as his body began to change, I noticed a different kind of transformation, one far more profound. In the beginning, I could sense his unease. He became quieter, more reserved when the topic of intimacy came up, and at times I could see the frustration in his eyes, even though he never said it out loud. His once natural confidence seemed to waver, especially as he began to notice that his erections weren't as firm or as frequent as they used to be. And then came the moment when he confided in me, admitted the fear he had been harboring silently, the fear that he was losing his identity as a man, that the physical changes meant he was somehow less worthy, less desirable, less of the person he had always been. It was heartbreaking to hear, knowing how much pressure he had placed on himself to maintain an image that had nothing to do with the love and connection we had shared over the years. But something incredible happened as he slowly began to let go of these outdated and unrealistic expectations. It was like watching a flower bloom. His confidence returned, but this time it was deeper, more authentic, and unshakable. This newfound confidence wasn't about physical appearance or sexual performance anymore. It came from a place of inner peace and acceptance, from the understanding that his value wasn't tied to the size of his penis or his ability to maintain an erection. He was realizing that his worth as a man, as my partner, had always been about far more than those superficial standards. It was in the way he loved, the way he cared for me, the way he had supported our family and showed up for life in all its complexities. This inner transformation brought about an evolution in our intimacy as well. Gone were the days of feeling pressured by performance or physical expectations. Instead, what we found was a deeper, richer connection that transcended the physical act of sex. Our encounters, though less frequent, became more meaningful. We discovered that intimacy didn't have to be tied to erections or orgasms. Instead, it could be found in the quiet moments, those precious, tender instances where we simply held each other, touched with intention, and allowed ourselves to be vulnerable in a way that we hadn't experienced before. Each time we shared an intimate moment, there was a profound sense of gratitude. It was as if we were celebrating the fact that despite the changes, despite the passage of time, we still had the capacity to love one another deeply. Our bodies had aged, but the essence of who we were as individuals and as a couple had only grown stronger. There was no need for urgency, no need to rush towards a specific goal. We could simply be present, fully aware of each other's touch, breath, and presence, and that alone brought us an indescribable sense of pleasure and fulfillment. One of the most powerful gifts that came with these changes was the ability to be truly vulnerable with one another. Vulnerability had not always come easily to us, particularly to my husband, who had long felt the need to embody strength and stoicism. But as we entered this new phase of life, we began to open up to each other in ways we never had before. We talked about the things that had once been left unsaid, our fears, our insecurities, the emotions we had both kept hidden for so long. My husband shared with me how difficult it had been to accept the changes in his body, how he had struggled with feelings of inadequacy and shame, as though the decline in his sexual performance somehow made him less of a man. He confessed that, for a time, he had feared that I would see him differently, that I would love him less because of the physical changes that were happening. But then, he told me something that made my heart swell with love. He had come to realize that his worth didn't depend on these things. Through our relationship, he had learned that true masculinity wasn't about meeting society's standards of virility. It was about being a loving, caring partner. It was about the way he treated me, the way he made me feel, the depth of our connection. In turn, I shared my own feelings. I was honest with him, telling him that while the physical changes had been surprising at first, they had never made me love him any less. In fact, I felt even more drawn to him, more in love with the person he had become. Our bond had deepened, not just because of the physical closeness, but because of the emotional and spiritual connection that had grown between us. We had learned to navigate these changes together, and in doing so, we had become stronger as a couple. I told him how much I valued his vulnerability, how much it meant to me that he had trusted me enough to share his deepest insecurities. What we both came to understand was that communication was at the heart of everything. Not just in the bedroom, but in every part of our relationship. We learned to talk openly about what we needed from each other, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. We stopped assuming that the other person would automatically know how we were feeling or what we wanted. Instead, we made a conscious effort to listen, to communicate, and to be present for one another. This open dialogue reignited the spark between us in ways we hadn't anticipated, keeping the connection alive and vibrant, even as the physical side of our relationship evolved. With each conversation, with each moment of intimacy, we built a relationship that was stronger and more resilient than it had ever been. We learned that love wasn't about maintaining the illusion of youth or adhering to some impossible standard of perfection. It was about showing up for each other, every day in every way. It was about loving each other fully, not just for our bodies but for our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. Now, as I look back on all that we've been through together, I realize that the challenges we faced were, in many ways, a gift. They forced us to confront parts of ourselves that we had kept hidden, and in doing so, they brought us closer together. We learned that true intimacy doesn't fade with time, it deepens. It grows stronger, more meaningful, and more profound as we continue to walk through life side by side. Our bodies may have changed, but our love remains, as fierce and as beautiful as it ever was. And for that, I am deeply grateful. As the years unfolded and life took its inevitable course, we found ourselves navigating through the physical changes that aging brings. It was gradual at first, almost imperceptible, but before long, the changes became undeniable. I watched as my husband wrestled with the frustration of no longer being able to perform in the same way he once did. His body, which had always been strong and reliable, began to show signs of aging, and it took a toll on his confidence. He had always been a proud man, carrying himself with a kind of self-assurance that made him a pillar of strength in our family. But as his body changed, I could see how it affected him. The weight of societal expectations, that men must remain virile and sexually capable even into old age, became a silent burden he carried. For a long time, he struggled with this. He felt the pressure to maintain an image of masculinity that had been ingrained in him since youth. He didn't talk about it at first, but I could sense it. His frustrations began to manifest in other ways, small irritations that seemed out of character, an increasing silence between us when the topic of intimacy arose. I knew he was wrestling with a fear that his worth as a man was somehow tied to his ability to perform sexually, that the changes in his body meant he was losing a vital part of himself. It broke my heart to see him carrying this burden, knowing how untrue it was. One evening, after we had shared a quiet dinner, I decided to talk to him about it. We sat on the couch, and I reached for his hand. I told him I had noticed how he'd been feeling, and that I wanted him to know it was okay to talk about it. At first, he resisted, brushing it off with a half-hearted smile. But I pressed gently, reminding him that we had always faced everything together, and this should be no different. Slowly, he began to open up. He admitted that the changes in his body had made him feel less like himself, less like the man he had always been. He felt as though he was losing a part of his identity, a part that had always been so closely tied to his sense of masculinity. If you are still watching this video, and find these lessons useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. We sat there for a long time, just talking, and in that moment, something shifted between us. I reassured him that his worth had never been tied to his physical abilities. What mattered to me wasn't his body's strength or appearance, but the man he was, the kindness he showed, the love he gave, the way he had always been there for me and for our family. I told him that the changes in his body didn't change how I saw him or how much I loved him. I loved him for the depth of his character, not for his physical performance. That conversation was a turning point for us, and from that moment on, our relationship began to evolve in ways we hadn't anticipated. We both realized that intimacy, at its core, was about far more than just physical connection. It was about the emotional bond we had built over decades, the trust and understanding that had grown between us, and the deep love that had endured through all the ups and downs of life. We shifted our focus from the physical side of intimacy to the emotional and spiritual connection that had always been there, but that we hadn't always prioritized. We began to nurture that connection with more intention, paying attention to each other's emotional needs and making space for vulnerability in ways we hadn't done before. We started to realize that sex wasn't just about the physical act, it was an extension of the emotional intimacy we shared. And when that emotional bond was strong, the physical pleasure we experienced together became even more meaningful. As my husband worked through his feelings of insecurity and began to accept the changes in his body, something beautiful happened. He started to take better care of himself, not because he was trying to reclaim some lost sense of youth, but because he wanted to feel good in his own skin again. He began to focus on his overall well-being, eating better, staying active in ways that suited his body, and practicing mindfulness to reduce stress. He let go of the pressure to perform sexually and instead embraced a more holistic approach to his health. This shift in focus brought about changes we hadn't expected. Ironically, as he let go of the need to meet society's standards of masculinity, his sex life improved in ways we hadn't anticipated. The stress and anxiety that had been weighing on him began to lift, and with it, the tension that had been building in our relationship dissipated. He was more relaxed, more present, and more able to enjoy our moments of intimacy without the constant pressure of performance. It was as if, by accepting his body as it was, he had freed himself to experience pleasure in a more authentic and fulfilling way. The change wasn't immediate, of course. There were still days when he struggled with feelings of frustration or doubt, moments when his insecurities resurfaced and he felt the weight of societal expectations creeping back in. But as time went on, those moments became fewer and farther between. We continued to work on our relationship, both individually and as a couple, learning to navigate the changes that aging brought with patience and understanding. One of the most important things we learned was the power of communication. We had always talked, but now we began to communicate in a deeper, more meaningful way. We didn't just talk about the surface-level issues anymore. We delved into our emotions, our fears, and our insecurities. My husband told me how much it had meant to him to feel seen and understood, to know that I didn't judge him for the changes in his body. And I told him how much I valued his honesty, how his vulnerability had only made me love him more. Through these conversations, we learned that intimacy wasn't just about what happened in the bedroom. It was about the little moments of connection that happened throughout the day, the way we listened to each other, the way we showed up for each other, and the way we continued to choose love even in the face of life's challenges. This emotional intimacy deepened our physical connection in ways we hadn't expected. We found that sex, when it did happen, was more fulfilling than it had ever been in our youth. There was no rush, no pressure to perform, just a deep sense of closeness and love. We learned to enjoy the moments of physical intimacy in a way that felt natural and relaxed, without the constraints of societal expectations. As I reflect on these years, I realize that the journey we went on together, through aging, through physical changes, through insecurities and doubts, was one of the most important journeys of our lives. It taught us that real intimacy isn't about physical perfection, it's about emotional connection. It's about being there for each other, through the highs and the lows, through the changes and the challenges, and knowing that your love is strong enough to withstand it all. In the end, it was the emotional intimacy we built that made our relationship what it is today, strong, resilient, and filled with a deep, abiding love that has only grown stronger with time. And that, more than anything, is what I am most grateful for. Over the years, as the changes in our bodies became more pronounced, my husband and I found ourselves in a new chapter of our relationship, one we hadn't fully anticipated but learned to embrace. It was a period of transition, and with that transition came both challenges and discoveries. One of the most unexpected and surprisingly powerful tools we discovered was humor. We found that learning to laugh together was one of the most important ways to navigate the awkward moments that came with aging. There were nights when things didn't go as planned, moments where bodies just didn't respond the way they once had. And instead of letting frustration take over, we laughed. At first, it was a nervous laughter, born from the discomfort of unmet expectations. But over time, it became a joyous, freeing laughter that released any tension or pressure we might have felt. We realized that it wasn't about perfection, it wasn't about getting everything right every time. It was about being in the moment together, about sharing an intimate experience that was uniquely ours, even if it wasn't what we had imagined. Laughter turned what could have been embarrassing or disappointing moments into cherished memories, and we began to see the beauty in the imperfections. Life, we learned, is full of imperfections, and that's exactly what makes it beautiful. The realization that we didn't need to take everything so seriously, especially in the bedroom, was incredibly liberating. There's a certain lightness that comes with letting go of rigid expectations and simply enjoying the connection you have with your partner. As we began to embrace this more relaxed attitude toward intimacy, something else shifted. We realized that our sexual relationship was evolving into something far more profound than just physical sex. It became about connection, about being present, about the way we touched each other with kindness and love. We learned to appreciate the quiet moments of intimacy in a way that we hadn't before. The little things, a soft touch, a lingering look, a heartfelt conversation, became just as important, if not more so, than the physical act of sex. It wasn't about reaching some predetermined goal, like climax or performance, but about being together in a shared space of love and understanding. We started to see that true pleasure wasn't just about what happened in bed. It was about the emotional intimacy that made those moments meaningful. The physical aspect became less important, and the emotional and spiritual connection between us became the driving force behind our closeness. As we continued to grow older, our sexual relationship became something of a reflection of the changes we were experiencing in other areas of our lives. We were learning together that life is about adapting, about finding new ways to connect and love each other. The journey of penile shrinkage and the physical changes that come with aging were not something to be feared, but something to be embraced with patience, love, and acceptance. We were both evolving, and instead of resisting those changes, we chose to see them as opportunities for growth. This process wasn't without its challenges. There were still days when frustration would creep back in, when my husband would feel the weight of society's expectations bearing down on him. The world often teaches men that their value lies in their physical abilities, their strength, their sexual performance, their virility. It's a message that's so deeply ingrained that even as we were working through these changes together, those old beliefs would sometimes resurface, causing moments of doubt and insecurity. But with each of those moments came an opportunity for us to communicate more openly, to talk about our fears and to reassure each other that our love was not dependent on physical performance, but on the connection we shared. I remember one particularly difficult day when my husband admitted to me that he felt like he was failing because his body wasn't what it used to be. He felt as though he was letting me down, even though I had never given him any reason to feel that way. It broke my heart to see how much pressure he was placing on himself, to realize just how much society's narrative about masculinity had affected him. But it was also a moment of incredible vulnerability, and that vulnerability brought us even closer. We talked about how masculinity isn't defined by the size of a man's penis or his ability to perform in the bedroom. It's about so much more. It's about the love and care he shows, the way he supports his partner, the way he treats others with kindness and respect. That conversation was a turning point. It allowed us to redefine what intimacy meant to us. We began to focus even more on emotional intimacy, on nurturing our connection outside of the bedroom. We started making a conscious effort to be more affectionate in our daily lives, not just during moments of physical closeness but throughout the day. We would hold hands more often, exchange small gestures of love, like leaving notes for each other or making time to sit and talk over a cup of tea. These small acts of love and care became the foundation of our relationship and made our moments of physical intimacy feel even more special. What surprised us both was that as we continued to nurture our emotional connection, our sex life improved in ways we hadn't expected. The pressure to perform had dissipated, and with it, the stress that often accompanies aging bodies. My husband began to relax more, to enjoy the moments of intimacy without the worry of whether or not his body would respond the way he wanted it to. And in that state of relaxation, his body often responded more naturally, more freely. We found that when we let go of expectations, we opened the door to a deeper kind of pleasure, one that wasn't based on physicality but on emotional closeness. An important part of this journey was also learning to accept the changes in our bodies with grace. We stopped viewing aging as something to fight against and started seeing it as a natural part of life. My husband began taking better care of himself, not because he wanted to regain some sense of youth, but because he wanted to feel good in his body as it was. He focused on maintaining his overall health, eating well, staying active in a way that suited him, and practicing relaxation techniques to manage stress. These changes improved not only his physical well-being but also his emotional and mental health, which in turn had a positive effect on our relationship. It's important to recognize that these changes didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process, one that required patience and understanding from both of us. There were setbacks along the way, moments of doubt when old insecurities would resurface, but we worked through them together. We kept the lines of communication open, always talking about how we were feeling and what we needed from each other. We learned to give ourselves grace, to understand that this was a journey, not a destination. Looking back now, I feel an immense sense of gratitude for everything we've been through. There's a kind of beauty that can only be found in mature love. A love that has weathered the storms of life, that has adapted and grown stronger with each passing year. The wild passion of youth has its place, but there's something even more fulfilling about the steady, enduring love that comes with age. It's a love that's rooted in trust, in mutual respect, and in the knowledge that you've built something together that is far more valuable than fleeting physical pleasures. So for any man or couple going through the changes that come with aging, my message is simple. Embrace the journey. Don't be afraid to talk about what you're experiencing, to open up about your fears and insecurities. Aging is a natural part of life, and with the right attitude, each stage can be just as fulfilling and meaningful as the one before. The size of the penis, the firmness of erections, these are just details. True masculinity, true connection, and true love come from how you treat each other, how you show up for one another, and how you continue to grow together. As we continue to age, we are still learning, still loving, still finding new ways to connect. And that, to me, is the greatest gift of all. Aging hasn't taken anything away from our relationship. In fact, it has given us more than we ever could have imagined. It has taught us that love, in all its forms, only grows stronger with time, and that the deepest kind of intimacy comes not from physical perfection but from the heart. As we grew older together, my husband and I found ourselves at a crossroads in our relationship, a point where the inevitable changes in our bodies, particularly his, challenged us to redefine what intimacy truly meant. It was no longer about the passionate moments of youth, where physical connection felt easy and automatic, but rather about something deeper. The more we leaned into the changes and embraced them instead of resisting, the more we discovered that intimacy, in its truest form, wasn't tied to physical performance or youthful vitality. It was something much more profound, something that only years of shared experiences and emotional vulnerability could bring. The journey was far from straightforward. I watched as my husband struggled internally with the changes his body was going through. The physical signs of aging, especially the ones related to his sexual health, had a way of creeping into our relationship in unexpected ways. It wasn't just about the loss of sexual function, it was the emotional weight that came with it. The societal narrative that ties a man's worth to his physical abilities was something my husband had internalized, even without realizing it. For so long, he had believed that his strength, virility, and ability to perform sexually were what defined his masculinity. When those things began to fade, he felt an unsettling loss of identity. At first, he tried to hide his frustration. He didn't want to talk about it, as if by ignoring the issue, it would somehow go away. But I could see the pain in his eyes, the way he withdrew emotionally, and the growing distance between us. I knew this wasn't just a physical problem, it was something much deeper. He was grappling with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if I still found him attractive, questioning if he was still enough. The silence between us on this topic only magnified the insecurity. I decided one evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, that we needed to talk about it. I sat next to him, took his hand, and told him that I noticed he had been carrying this burden alone. I told him that he didn't have to face this by himself, that I was there with him, and that nothing about his body's changes affected the way I loved him. It wasn't an easy conversation. His first instinct was to brush it off, to say it wasn't a big deal. But as we talked, I saw the cracks in his armor begin to show. He admitted that he felt like he was losing something essential to his identity, that he wasn't the man he used to be, and that he worried I would see him differently. In that moment, something shifted. We realized that the real issue wasn't the physical changes themselves, but the emotional toll they were taking on him, on us. We had built our relationship on so much more than just physical attraction or sexual connection, but these changes were forcing us to confront what we had always known, that intimacy is about so much more than the act of sex. It's about emotional closeness, vulnerability, and being seen and loved for who you are, not what your body can do. The more we talked, the more we understood that these changes, as difficult as they were, offered us an opportunity to grow even closer. It was a chance to redefine what intimacy meant for us, to explore new ways of connecting that weren't tied to physical performance. We learned to find joy and fulfillment in the small moments, a gentle touch, holding hands, a long conversation over a cup of coffee. These gestures, though simple, took on new meaning. They became acts of love that reinforced the bond we had built over decades. It was a different kind of intimacy, one that wasn't about reaching a climax but about being present with each other in a way that was truly profound. As we leaned into this new phase of our relationship, I saw my husband begin to change, not just physically but emotionally. He started to let go of the societal expectations that had weighed him down for so long. He began to realize that his value as a man wasn't tied to his ability to perform sexually, but to the way he showed up in our relationship, in our family, and in his life. He began to understand that true masculinity wasn't about strength or virility. It was about compassion, emotional availability, and the ability to love deeply. If you are still watching this video, and find these lessons useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. This realization was liberating for him. He began to take better care of himself, not because he wanted to reverse the aging process, but because he wanted to feel good in his body as it was. He started to focus on his overall health, eating better, exercising regularly, and taking time to relax and manage stress. These changes didn't just improve his physical well-being, they also had a profound effect on his emotional health. He became more confident, more at peace with the man he had become, and more open to the emotional intimacy that we were rediscovering together. I too found myself growing through this process. I realized that love isn't static, it's something that evolves over time, just as we do. The love we shared in our younger years was passionate and exciting, but the love we were discovering in this later stage of life was something different, something deeper. It was a love that had been tested by time and experience, a love that had survived the challenges of life and come out stronger on the other side. There was a beauty in the quiet moments we shared, in the way we learned to communicate more openly, in the way we showed up for each other not out of obligation, but out of genuine care and affection. As my husband's relationship with his own body changed, so did our relationship with each other. The pressure to meet societal expectations around sex and performance faded away, and what was left was something far more valuable, an emotional intimacy that had been there all along, but that we had never fully tapped into. We found that the more we focused on being emotionally present for each other, the more fulfilling our physical connection became, even if it looked different than it had in the past. We learned to laugh together about the moments that didn't go as planned. There were times when things didn't work out physically, but instead of feeling embarrassed or frustrated, we just laughed. Laughter became a balm, a way to ease the tension and remind ourselves that life is full of imperfections, and that's okay. Those moments of humor, of shared vulnerability, brought us closer than ever. The journey wasn't without its setbacks. There were days when my husband still struggled with old insecurities, when the fear of not being enough would creep back in. But we faced those moments together, reminding each other of the strength of our bond, of the love that had carried us through so many other challenges. Each time we navigated those difficult moments, we came out stronger, more connected, and more in tune with each other's needs. Looking back, I can see that this journey of aging, of confronting the changes in our bodies and redefining intimacy, was one of the most profound experiences of our lives. It taught us that love isn't about physical perfection or meeting some arbitrary standard. It's about being there for each other, through the highs and the lows, through the changes and the challenges, and knowing that your partner loves you not in spite of those changes, but because of them. To anyone going through a similar experience, my advice is simple: embrace the journey. Don't be afraid to talk about the changes you're experiencing, to be vulnerable with each other, and to let go of the expectations that society places on us. Aging is a natural part of life, and with it comes an opportunity to deepen your connection, to rediscover intimacy in new ways, and to grow together in ways you never imagined. In the end, what we discovered is that true intimacy, the kind that lasts, the kind that sustains you through the years, isn't about physicality. It's about emotional closeness, trust, and the love you've built over a lifetime. And that, to me, is the most beautiful part of aging together. As my husband and I have journeyed through the process of aging together, we've encountered a path that has been both unexpected and deeply rewarding. It's a road we hadn't anticipated, filled with subtle discoveries, quiet revelations, and a new understanding of intimacy. We've come to see that, while the physical aspects of our relationship may have changed over time, the emotional and spiritual dimensions have grown richer than we could have ever imagined. Intimacy has shifted from the physical passion of youth to a profound connection rooted in love, respect, and shared history. In the early years of our relationship, like many couples, we placed a great deal of emphasis on the physical side of intimacy. Sex was frequent and spontaneous, full of passion and excitement. It was thrilling to be young, to feel that rush of attraction, to get lost in each other's bodies. Back then, it seemed like physical connection was the foundation of our relationship. But as time went on, as our bodies aged and our lives changed, we realized that the physical aspect of intimacy was only one small part of a much larger whole. As the years passed, my husband and I found ourselves confronting the realities of aging. The physical changes were undeniable. His once strong body, which had carried him through the demands of life with ease, began to slow down. There were moments when he struggled with the changes, moments of frustration when he felt that his body had betrayed him. For a man who had always been confident and physically capable, it was a difficult adjustment. I could see it in his eyes, the way he would shy away from intimacy at times, as though he feared that he wasn't enough anymore. But what we both learned, through patience, conversation, and shared vulnerability, was that the essence of intimacy wasn't confined to our physical selves. In fact, as the physical aspects of our relationship changed, we discovered a deeper, more meaningful form of connection. Intimacy became less about the act of sex and more about the closeness we shared in everyday life. It was about the way we supported each other, the way we made space for one another's feelings, the way we communicated without words through a simple touch or a glance. For us, aging became a time of reawakening to the small joys that had always been there but that we had once taken for granted. We realized that intimacy could be found in the moments of everyday life, a gentle brush of hands as we passed each other in the kitchen, sitting together quietly on the porch as the sun set, or sharing a conversation late at night when the world had gone to sleep. These moments, which seemed so ordinary on the surface, became some of the most intimate and profound experiences we shared. They were reminders that true intimacy isn't about physical performance. It's about being fully present for one another, about creating a space where we could both be vulnerable, honest, and deeply connected. As we moved through this new phase of our relationship, we began to explore the subtler forms of affection, the ones that don't require the physical energy of youth but that carry their own weight of meaning. A hand resting on my knee during dinner, a lingering hug before bed, or the way he would reach for my hand when we walked side by side. All of these small gestures became expressions of a love that had grown richer and more profound over time. We learned that intimacy didn't need to be grand or intense. It could be quiet, steady, and full of grace. One of the most significant lessons we've learned is that intimacy isn't tied to what society often tells us it should be. Society places so much emphasis on physicality, on youth, beauty, strength, and sexual performance, that it can make us feel as though we lose something essential as we age. My husband, like many men, struggled with this at first. He felt the weight of societal expectations, the pressure to remain physically strong and virile even as his body naturally began to change. There were moments when I could see that these expectations were causing him to feel inadequate, as though he were somehow failing because he could no longer meet the physical standards of his younger years. But as we talked more openly about what we were both experiencing, something shifted. We realized that the expectations we had placed on ourselves were unnecessary, that our relationship was not defined by physicality but by the depth of the love we shared. My husband began to let go of the need to prove something, to me, to himself, to the world. He started to embrace who he was in the present, not who he used to be. And in doing so, he found a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that came not from his physical abilities but from his emotional strength and his capacity to love deeply. This shift in perspective brought a new kind of freedom into our relationship. Without the pressure of societal expectations, we were able to explore intimacy in a way that felt authentic to us. We learned to appreciate the beauty in the small moments of connection, the way we looked after each other, the laughter we shared, and the way we leaned on each other for support. There was no longer a need to chase after the physical intensity of our youth because what we had now felt more enduring, more sustaining. It's not that physical intimacy disappeared from our relationship, it's that it evolved. We learned to find joy in the subtle expressions of love, in the quiet moments of physical closeness that didn't require the same energy but carried a different kind of depth. We also learned to be gentle with ourselves when things didn't go as planned. There were nights when our bodies didn't cooperate, when the desire for intimacy was there but the physical reality wasn't. In those moments, instead of frustration, we turned to laughter. We laughed at the imperfections of aging, at the way our bodies sometimes seem to have minds of their own, and in that laughter we found relief. Humor became a way for us to navigate the challenges of aging with grace, to remind ourselves that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. Looking back on these years, I am filled with gratitude for the journey we've taken together. It hasn't always been easy, but it has been filled with moments of growth, discovery, and deepening love. The passion of youth is fleeting, but the love we've cultivated through the years is something that continues to grow, even as our bodies age. It's a love that has been tested by time and experience, a love that has weathered the storms of life and come out stronger on the other side. What I've come to understand is that intimacy is a lifelong journey. It's not something that diminishes with age, it's something that evolves, becoming more profound and meaningful as we move through life together. Each phase of life offers new opportunities to connect, to grow, and to deepen our relationship. The physical changes that come with aging are just one part of the story, but they don't define the story. What defines our relationship is the love we share, the way we continue to show up for each other, and the way we've learned to adapt and grow together. For anyone who is facing the changes that come with aging, my message is simple: embrace the journey. Don't let societal expectations or fears of physical decline keep you from experiencing the full depth of intimacy. True connection comes not from physical perfection, but from the emotional closeness you share with your partner. As you grow older, you'll find that the love you've built over time becomes your greatest strength, your most cherished gift. Aging together has been one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. It has taught me that love isn't about staying the same. It's about growing together, about finding new ways to connect and express affection, and about continuing to choose each other, day after day, through every phase of life. And that, to me, is the true essence of intimacy. As my husband and I continued to grow older together, we found ourselves on a journey of transformation that neither of us could have predicted. It was a journey that redefined how we viewed not only ourselves, but also each other. The aging process, with all its challenges and changes, presented us with the opportunity to see intimacy and pleasure in a new light, one that was far removed from the narrow definitions we had held in our youth. It was an exploration of love that went beyond the physical and moved into deeper emotional and spiritual realms. In our younger years, like many couples, we were swept up in the excitement of physical intimacy. The passion was fiery, spontaneous, and full of the kind of energy that comes with youth. It felt, at the time, like the very essence of love, something we measured by our ability to perform and maintain that physical connection. Back then, sex was the main currency of intimacy, a way we expressed our love, desire, and affection for one another. But as time passed, and as our bodies began to change, we were confronted with a new reality, that this currency had to evolve, or we risked losing the profound connection that had always been the foundation of our relationship. For my husband, the changes were more difficult to accept at first. He had been taught, like so many men, that his value was tied to his physical strength, his virility, and his ability to perform sexually. When those abilities began to wane, he struggled with feelings of inadequacy. There were moments when he withdrew, feeling like less of a man, unsure of where he fit into this new phase of our relationship. It broke my heart to see him so weighed down by the pressure of these outdated ideals that had no bearing on the love and respect I felt for him. But something unexpected happened as we navigated these changes together. We realized that, in letting go of the old expectations we had placed on ourselves and each other, we were making space for a different kind of intimacy, one that was rooted in emotional vulnerability, mutual understanding, and the quiet pleasures that come with a lifetime of shared experiences. The pleasure we once sought from physical fulfillment began to take on new forms. Instead of focusing on physical acts, we found joy in each other's presence. The simple act of sitting together, holding hands, or sharing a laugh became just as meaningful as anything that happened in the bedroom. There was something incredibly freeing about this realization. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like we no longer needed to meet some arbitrary standard of what intimacy should look like. We learned that true intimacy wasn't about reaching climaxes or proving ourselves through physical acts. It was about being fully present with each other, about feeling understood and accepted for who we were in that moment, imperfections and all. The physical changes that come with aging were no longer something to fear. They were simply a part of the journey. In fact, as our bodies aged, we found that our emotional and spiritual connection grew even stronger. We began to appreciate the subtleties of affection in ways that we had overlooked in our youth. The quiet moments of companionship, the shared looks that spoke volumes, and the gentle touches that carried the weight of years of love. These were the things that became the true markers of our intimacy. They were the things that reminded us of the life we had built together, of the countless memories we had created, and of the deep, unshakable bond that had sustained us through the ups and downs of life. As we explored this new dimension of our relationship, we came to see that the pressures of youth, pressures to perform, to be physically perfect, to meet some external expectation, were no longer relevant. We didn't need to prove anything to each other anymore. We had already proven the most important thing, that our love was strong enough to endure, to grow, and to evolve with time. The physical aspect of our relationship, while still present, had taken a back seat to something far more meaningful, the emotional and spiritual connection we shared. We also learned to be more attuned to each other's needs. Aging brought with it a certain wisdom, a kind of patience that we hadn't fully grasped when we were younger. We became more compassionate toward ourselves and each other. We learned to listen more deeply, to offer comfort in ways that didn't always require words. There was a new tenderness in the way we approached intimacy, a tenderness that came from years of knowing each other's hearts, from having weathered life storms together, and from understanding that true love is not about perfection but about presence. It was in this space that we found a new kind of pleasure. It wasn't the intense, physical pleasure that we had once chased in our youth. It was softer, gentler, and more enduring. It was the pleasure of simply being together, of knowing that we were loved and accepted, not despite the changes we had gone through but because of them. The physical intimacy we shared, though less frequent, was infused with a depth that we had never experienced before. It was no longer about reaching a goal. It was about the journey itself, about the connection that had deepened over the years. As we embraced these changes, we also discovered that intimacy could be found in the smallest of moments. It was in the way we cared for each other when one of us was feeling unwell, in the way we laughed at the little things, in the way we simply sat together in comfortable silence. These moments of quiet companionship became the backbone of our relationship. They were the reminders that intimacy is not confined to the bedroom. It is woven into every aspect of our lives. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Looking back, I can see that the changes aging brought were not something to fear, but something to embrace. They were an invitation to explore new ways of being, of loving, and of connecting with each other. They were a reminder that intimacy is not about physical performance, but about the connection we build over time, the connection that is strengthened by shared experiences, by trust, and by the deep emotional understanding that grows when two people walk through life together. My message to anyone facing the changes that come with aging is simple. Don't be afraid to let go of the old definitions of intimacy and pleasure. Don't let the societal pressures to remain youthful or physically perfect rob you of the opportunity to experience a deeper, more fulfilling kind of connection. Aging is not the end of intimacy. It's a new beginning. It's a chance to discover that true intimacy is about so much more than the physical. It's about being fully present with your partner, about sharing your vulnerabilities, about trusting each other in ways that go beyond the surface. As we continue to age, my husband and I are still learning, still growing, still discovering new ways to love each other. The pleasure we once sought from physical acts has expanded into a pleasure that is rooted in companionship, in emotional closeness, and in the simple joy of being together. And that, I believe, is the greatest gift of all. Aging may bring changes to the body, but it also brings the opportunity to experience intimacy in ways that are richer, more profound, and more enduring than anything we experienced in our youth. It is a journey worth embracing, a journey that teaches us that love is not bound by time or physical limitations. Instead, it grows deeper with each passing year, offering new ways to connect, to support, and to cherish the one you love. As the years unfolded and my husband and I grew older together, we found ourselves on a path we hadn't expected, one that changed how we understood love, intimacy, and connection. At first, it was a bit disorienting, as the physical vibrancy that once defined our relationship gradually gave way to the realities of aging. What we had once taken for granted, the spontaneity and physicality of our intimacy, began to shift, forcing us to confront what it meant to truly be close to one another. We both experienced the inevitable changes that aging brings, but instead of allowing those changes to distance us, we used them as an opportunity to deepen our relationship in ways we hadn't imagined. For my husband, the changes were particularly challenging. Like many men, he had been raised in a society that places a great deal of emphasis on physical strength, virility, and the ability to perform sexually. As those aspects of his identity began to shift, he struggled internally, feeling as though he had lost a part of himself. There were times when I could see him withdrawing, unsure of how to talk about the feelings of inadequacy that crept in as his body aged. But over time, we began to realize that the aging process was offering us something we hadn't expected, a chance to redefine what love and intimacy meant to us. In our youth, intimacy was often tied to the physical, a touch, a kiss, a moment of passion that reassured us of our connection. It was easy to believe that love was primarily expressed through these physical acts. But as we grew older, we began to see that intimacy was much deeper than the physical experiences we had once thought were the center of it all. It became more about emotional closeness, about the shared understanding that had grown between us over decades of being together. It became about how we supported each other, how we listened, and how we showed up for one another in the little moments of daily life. What we learned was that the physical changes we were going through didn't diminish our love. They opened the door to new ways of connecting. We discovered that intimacy could be expressed in countless ways beyond what happens in the bedroom. A gentle touch on the shoulder, a lingering look across the room, a warm embrace as we sat together in the quiet of the evening. These were the moments that began to define our relationship. These were the acts of love that spoke louder than any grand gesture or physical expression ever could. One of the greatest gifts of this process was learning to be vulnerable with one another. In our younger years, there was a kind of unspoken pressure to be strong, to be capable, to live up to societal expectations about what a relationship should look like. But as we grew older, those pressures began to melt away. We no longer felt the need to prove anything to one another. Instead, we began to open up about our fears, our insecurities, and our hopes for the future. We became more willing to share the parts of ourselves that we had kept hidden for so long. This vulnerability didn't weaken our relationship, it strengthened it. I remember the first time my husband shared with me his concerns about aging. He admitted that he felt as though he was losing something essential, that the physical changes in his body made him feel less like himself. It was a difficult conversation, one that was filled with emotion and honesty. But it was also a turning point for us. In that moment, I realized that what mattered most wasn't how our bodies had changed, but how we chose to navigate those changes together. I reassured him that my love for him had never been tied to his physical abilities, that what I valued most was the person he had always been, the man who had stood by my side through every twist and turn of life. From that moment on, our relationship began to evolve in new ways. We learned that love, at its core, isn't about physical performance or meeting some external standard. It's about being fully present with one another, about creating a space where both of us could be our true, authentic selves without fear of judgment. We began to focus less on what we thought we should be doing, and more on simply enjoying the connection we shared. This shift in perspective allowed us to experience intimacy in a way that was richer and more fulfilling than anything we had known in our younger years. As we let go of the need to perform or live up to certain expectations, we found that the pressure lifted. What replaced it was a quiet kind of joy, the joy of simply being with each other, of knowing that we had built a life together that was full of love, trust, and mutual respect. We discovered that intimacy could be found in the smallest of moments, a shared laugh over a silly joke, a long conversation about our hopes and dreams, a walk through the park, holding hands as we watched the world go by. These moments, though simple, became the bedrock of our relationship. Another thing we learned was the importance of acceptance, not just of each other but of ourselves. We came to understand that aging is a natural part of life, something that happens to everyone. The changes in our bodies were not something to be ashamed of, but something to embrace. They were a reflection of the life we had lived, of the experiences we had shared, and of the wisdom we had gained along the way. Instead of focusing on what we had lost, we began to focus on what we had gained, a deeper understanding of each other, a greater appreciation for the time we had, and a newfound sense of peace. Through this process, we also realized that pleasure doesn't diminish with age, it simply takes on new forms. In our younger years, we often sought pleasure in the physical, in the intensity of sexual connection. But as we grew older, we found pleasure in different places. We found it in the emotional closeness we shared, in the way we made each other feel valued and cared for. We found pleasure in the quiet moments of companionship, in the comfort of knowing that we were there for each other, no matter what. The intensity of youth may fade, but in its place grows a love that is steady, reliable, and deeply fulfilling. What surprised us most was that, as we embraced these changes, our relationship didn't weaken, it strengthened. The bond we shared became more profound because it was no longer dependent on the fleeting aspects of physical attraction or sexual performance. Instead, it was built on a foundation of emotional intimacy, of trust, and of shared experiences. We learned that true intimacy isn't about the physical act of sex. It's about the connection between two people, the way they see and understand each other, the way they choose to love and support one another through every phase of life. For those who are facing the same journey, my advice is to embrace it. Aging is not a decline, it's an evolution. It's an opportunity to rediscover your relationship, to find new ways of connecting, and to experience a love that is deeper and more meaningful than anything you could have imagined in your younger years. Don't let the changes in your body define your relationship. Instead, focus on the connection you share, the love that has grown over time, and the joy of being with someone who knows you inside and out. True intimacy, we've learned, is not about what your body can do. It's about the heart's capacity to give and receive love, and that capacity never diminishes with age. In fact, it only grows stronger. The love you build over a lifetime, the connection you nurture through all of life's changes, is the greatest gift of all. It's a love that transcends the physical, a love that is enriched by time, patience, and the willingness to grow together. And that, I believe, is the true essence of intimacy. We've covered a lot of important insights today about the emotional and physical aspects of intimacy as we age. So, what have you learned so far? Please take a moment to comment below and share one thing that resonated with you or something you plan to apply in your own life moving forward. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more valuable insights. Your support means the world to us.